My name is Bruce Bell, and I'm the historian here for this great room that we are in. I'm also the historian and the tour guide at St. Lawrence Market, of which this is connected to. And a lot of people ask me, who is St. Lawrence? Why is everything in this neighborhood named St. Lawrence? Well, it's named for St. Lawrence, who was, is, I guess still, the patron saint of Canada. Jacques Cartier, the French explorer, discovered Quebec on the Feast of St. Lawrence. So he renamed the river Saint Laurent. And when the British arrived here in 1793, they named all the original neighborhoods here in the city of Toronto after the British patron saints. St. George's neighborhood for England, St. Andrew's for Scotland, and the first neighborhood where we are was named for St. Lawrence, because this is where Toronto was founded, on this very spot where we are standing. This is the original landing site when the British came ashore from Niagara-on-the-Lake. They wanted to get as far away from America as possible because America was going to attack. So the British said, let's come across Lake Ontario, and they landed here in this wilderness area. And so in the year 1793, they built a little town. They called it York. And right here, they built the very first town hall, a little wooden structure and a little market that was right behind it. And Front Street, which is right there, used to be the shoreline. Everything south of Front Street, as you know, was all the old landfill of the city. But back then, 200 years ago, little town hall, 200 people. But by 1850, we now had about 75,000 people were now living in the city of Toronto. And we had a huge fire. The Great Fire of 1849 happened on April 7th, 1849, and destroyed the old wooden town. And there was a lot of money that was now here in Toronto, so they decided to build a grand hall, the very hall we are in today, and they called it St. Lawrence Hall. And this is the room. It opened on April 1st, 1851. And the very first person who was asked to speak here in this room was a man named Frederick Douglass, who was the leader of the Abolitionist Party in the United States. He was a freed black American slave who taught himself how to read and write. And he worked his way up to found the Underground Railroad, the Freedom Trail. Now, Canada had abolished slavery many years before, back in the 1700s. Actually, the day they founded Toronto was the day that slavery was abolished here in Canada in 1793. So a lot of those free slaves were now escaping America and coming here to Toronto. And they came and they were welcomed into this very room as Frederick Douglass would be giving his great speeches on the need to be free. Well, at the same time the hall was built, the railway came to Toronto. The railway arrived here in 1854, and that changed the course of our history. We were always considered, always second to Montreal and Quebec and Halifax and New York City because we were so isolated. We were a nice-looking town. We had this great hall. We were built on the lake. We had a nice market, 70,000 people. But as soon as that railway came, everything changed. And it brought into our city all the goods and beer and tea that the world had to offer. And one of the very first tea warehouses was built here in St. Lawrence Hall. Today, when you go outside, you'll see there's a bank on the corner, the Royal Bank of Canada. Originally, that was the tea house. That's where a lot of the tea that was coming in from India and Ceylon would have been stored here. And if you look at old photographs taken of St. Lawrence Hall in the 1860s and 70s, you will not only see at the top St. Lawrence Hall, but you'll also see the grand tea house of Toronto. And across the street, if you go to Front Street, where there's a Starbucks, can you imagine there's a Starbucks on Front Street? There's a Starbucks on Front Street, there's a liquor store, and then there's the Starbucks store. That warehouse that the Starbucks is in, it's a beautiful warehouse. It was built in 1872. It's all made of really nice yellow brick. If you stand at the Metro grocery store and look across the street, you can really see it. Well, that was built as the Lipton Tea House. And the Liptons, the or one of the great tea manufacturers, of course. Well, they started to really import tea into Toronto. Tea was becoming very popular. You know, Queen Victoria was drinking her tea, and before that, you know, King George III, he's the one who really brought it into the forefront. And now that, you know, India was part of the British Empire, which Canada was now part of the British Empire, tea was coming into the city at an enormous rate. People used to drink beer a lot. I mean, babies were drinking. Mothers would give beer to their babies. Judges, police officers, everyone drank beer because the water tasted terrible. Water wasn't, you know, purified like it is today. You never really thought of drinking water. You used to, you know, use water to wash and clean, but to actually drink water was almost unheard of. So you started drinking a watered-down version of beer. Well, that kind of stops you from doing a lot of things. And if we were all drinking beer since 8 o'clock this morning, would you want to be listening to me now? But that's when tea came into it. Tea offered you that same euphoric feeling without, you know, wanting you to have a little nap after, you know, your 7th bottle of beer. So tea really started to change the fortunes of Toronto. Toronto became, by 1900, a city of 500,000 people. How many people here are born in Toronto? Not that many. I'm from Sudbury, and my friend, where's Teresa? There, Teresa and I are from Sudbury. I mean, when you think of all of us and the friends that you know, I mean, only a handful of people that we actually know are actually born in this city. 500 people a day move to Toronto. So you can imagine back in 1900 having 500,000 people living in a city that wasn't even 100 years old yet. So this room here, this is where all the Fathers of Confederation used to meet also back in the 1860s, before they would go to Charlottetown to sign the British North America Act to create the nation of Canada. They used to meet here. They came here. John A. Macdonald, our first Prime Minister, would stand right where I'm standing right now, and he would talk about the need for Canada to become its own nation. And it was also in this very room that the Liberal Party of Canada was founded in November of 1859, when George Brown, who was another father of Confederation, another one of the founding fathers of Canada, would stand here and talk about how we must have political parties in this city, we must have an idea of going back and forth. And George Brown also published the Globe newspaper, which is still around today, and they named the university across the street. Have you ever been to George Brown College? Have you seen it? Have you been inside? You know that it's there? That was built in 1871 as a biscuit plant. Because of all the tea that was coming into the city, they realized that tea goes really good with biscuits. So Mr. George Christie built one of the largest factories here in Toronto, the Christie Cookie House. Now, Mr. Christie still makes great cookies, but that entire factory, when you leave here, after you look at the bank downstairs where the tea was stored, look across the street at the size of George Christie's cookie factory, and you'll just see how enormous that was just to make biscuits so people could have with their afternoon tea. And they're still around today. They're no longer there. They've moved out to Etobicoke. But this room, for the first 50 years of its life, was one of the most famous rooms in Canada, and it's also where the very first Victoria Cross was handed out to a man named Alexander, who there's a park named after him. There's Mr. Alexander was only 21 years old when he was awarded the Victoria Cross, and it was given here in 1858 in this very room where we are. And every night for the first 50 years of its life, you didn't sit at home watching TV, you came out and you saw shows. You would see live shows, and this room was very much a part of that. Every night there'd be something different. It wasn't just political events, it was also music acts and comedy. The very first motion pictures were slideshows were also shown in this room. But by 1900, tastes had changed, and they actually closed this room up and they threw away the key. They boarded up that staircase, and for 50 years this room just lay waste. There was nothing, no one ever came up here. The city forgot about it. And by 1950, you know, Toronto now with a population of well over 1 million, they were going to tear down this building. But luckily Eric Arthur, who was the historian of of Architecture at University of Toronto, he said, no, we must save this building. This is the history of Canada, is in this very room where we are right now, and it would just be a tragedy if it went. So in 1967, they renovated the whole place. They found the old chandelier down in the basement. They put the gas back in. They fixed up the ceiling. They made it into what it is today. And here where we are, drinking our tea.